1995 was a great year. That Christmas, I received Chrono Trigger, one of my all-time favorite RPGs. I also, over the course of the next few years, got to play a number of other really enjoyable RPGs, from Secret of Mana and Secret of Evermore, Lufia 2, Final Fantasy VI, after beating 4 years ago. And it would not be years until I got to play a RPG in the 3D. So for that time, pixel art and pixel graphics RPGs were the thing for me. Now they each did something really well, but were clearly limited. And this year, I got to finally get my hands on CrossCode, a game that manages to blend many great elements from those games of my childhood and improve upon them in a number of ways. CrossCode can be best described as a top-down action RPG that you play single player. It has a lot of the same elements as older action RPGs like Secret of Mana or Secret of Evermore. First up would be CrossCode and its gameplay. There's combat, a simple melee, range, block, dash, and combat art or skills. It has platforming, which is interesting how they do it, whereas you get to a ledge and leap the moment you get to the edge of the map. So you don't have to time your jumps like in a traditional platformer. You just have to gauge the distance that your character can jump. There is crafting and questing. There is level ups and skill trees. There is a pretty good UI with lots of custom map options and fast travel that you can unlock. So it has, the exploration that you would get from a traditional RPG of the old days, but it has a few modern conveniences. The combat in the game can be very rewarding and challenging at times. It has a simple rhythm of melee, dodge out, shoot a few times, dodge back in, and you can weave in your attacks quite nicely. The game also gives you new abilities via the circuit tree if you pick them, or just completing the dungeons unlocks a new element which mixes up your combat. These different elements also have their own trees, so while overall you can be a ranged character, your fire tree, which is the first one you get, can end up being more melee centric, so when you switch over, you're playing a different style altogether. The reward of completing a dungeon and getting a new element and getting to test out that element throughout the dungeon and getting level ups and getting more gear are very great for a more extrinsic kind of player who gets rewards via the game. Now, the game also features a more intrinsic reward system for combat, and that is the combat rank. The more enemies you kill in rapid succession, the more your rank goes up. While in combat, your health regeneration is none, unless you have items or skill points. And so this gives you a desire to push forward and see how far you can keep the combat rank going, because the timer does eventually run out. So the longer you can keep it going, the better, and you are rewarded with better drop rates from the enemies you're killing. So there is a other kind of reward, but it also gives you a sense of your own challenge to see how long you can keep at it. Like the combat in the game, puzzles are introduced very early and also gradually increase in difficulty as you increase in skill and you get more skills to your arsenal to use. The game blends its parkour-like elements from jumping around with its combat skills and its puzzles. You can explore the main connecting maps and get rewarded, or you can explore the few dungeons in the game and get rewarded. And the dungeons are more than just fighting enemies. Much like games like Zelda, you are given a new skill, and in that dungeon you get to learn how to use it. So it has a very good get item, learn item, use item flow throughout the entire game, and it works really well to teach the player the mechanics at a fair pace without being too easy, but without just throwing it at you. Never will you get a new skill and then immediately be expected to use it on a boss. You get to learn it a little bit and then get to use everything that you've learned in the dungeon on the boss. I've only come across it once, but there was a puzzle that felt a lot like the combat rank, except in puzzle form, where you didn't necessarily have to do it a certain way, but you did get rewarded a little bit, and I found myself trying for nearly 20 minutes to make sure that I beat the puzzle at a certain time limit, with the handicap that it places on you of not being able to block attacks. And while it did take a while, it was very, very satisfying when I finally finished it, and finished it a lot faster than my original run. I won't talk much about the story since it is an RPG and it is something that is very core. It is enjoyable. The game is set in a MMO game and it's very lighthearted about it, makes quite a bit of jabs at itself, very self-aware. The characters are what you expect to find in an MMO, at least one back in the mid-2000s, early 2000s. And your character, being a typical silent protagonist, also has a fun explanation, as it's just your voice glitching, so they're trying to fix it. Being a pixel art game, it's kind of hit or miss, more or less, for a lot of people. I personally enjoy it, and if it's done well, find it endearing. I don't just like all pixel art. Some of it is pretty lazily done, but the music is also very nice and brings me back to that Super Nintendo PS1 kind of days with the music, and that was also good. And while I explained earlier that the main character has a very limited vocabulary, the pixel artwork that they do shows a lot of expression, and it really goes a long way. This game also features a very detailed UI and customization of that UI. You can completely remove a lot of the stuff that you see. And while on the topic of options, there is no easy, medium, or hard mode in this game. What you adjust is the damage you take, the rate that the enemies attack you, and the speed of the puzzles. So if the puzzles are what's stumping you and not the combat, you can actually slow those down because they can get pretty fast and you have to have as much reaction time to do them as you would in combat. In making this review, I told myself I'd only play it for a little bit, and it ended up really sucking me in to the point that I'm at 11 hours after only a day or two of playing this game, and I kind of want to go back and play some more, but I wanted to get enough done to get a review out. So yes, it's a good game, and yes, I enjoyed it. I would recommend it to anybody that likes action RPG games, or even if the combat is not your thing, it has the puzzles, or vice versa. And like I said, you can adjust the difficulty on those two separate things, which bring the most challenge in the game. Overall though, solid choice. Not that expensive if I remember, under $20 for sure on Steam, and a really good example of a retro style game done right, not just to cash out on nostalgia.